wave a magic wand, you're in charge of the United States. Game theory that out, right? So what would you do?
Wave a section magic wand, get out of the United States.
But I've heard you talk about concepts like special economic zones or sort of experimental zones where people might be able to try stuff. Like, do you think big countries could actually replicate some of these things using some tactics like this?
Not today. I think it would have to be something like, how Microsoft was reformed by Google, right? But the reform process took place because Larry and Sergey went. They were not intending to reform Google or to reform Microsoft. They went out, did their own thing, and they proved out that open source worked, that the cloud worked, that search was a business model that could scale, that Office software could be done for free. They proved all of these things, right? And each of those points was completely contrary to Microsoft's culture and everything that had worked for them. Ballmer fought it tooth and nail for the better part of a decade. All that is public record. He called open source communism, blah, 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 right? And he was bearish on search and bearish on the cloud and whatever, right? For a long time. And then when Satya took over, he had, the proof points in these other companies and organizations that had done all these things that had been argued against within Microsoft. And then he used that to help reform Microsoft internally. So now Microsoft's a real player in the cloud. Azure is actually doing pretty well. They're innovating. They're actually doing real stuff. Their Surface is pretty good. Their tablet's pretty good. But all of that could only have taken place if the alternative had been obvious, right? And it's the same thing I think that happened, with China itself, for example. Like when Deng Xiaoping took power in 1978, after a very circuitous thing, by the way, everybody should understand the history of China. How did the country become rich? Pretty important thing to know. Very few Americans, when I ask them that question, can give me a blow by blow of how that happened. But roughly speaking, the country was under Mao, and it was communist, and literally entrepreneurship was punishable by death. You can Google NPR story on this, the contract that changed China, right? And essentially, what happened was when Deng took over in 1978, all these farmers who were just under the hand of the state, he's like, okay, maybe we'll let you keep some of what you harvest, like some, right? And that was this massive, thing, this massive breakthrough. And, he set up Shenzhen, this special economic zone, as you referenced, because he didn't try to reform the entire country at once. He did one small piece, and he said, capitalism is legal here. He didn't call it that. He called it communism. And the critical thing was, it was across the causeway from Hong Kong. And it was the examples of Hong Kong and Singapore and Taiwan that gave him proof points that this thing would work. Even though for 30 years, the entire propaganda within China was communism is good, capitalist order, shoot them, kill them, etc. Right? And so those external proof points gave him the ability to reform internally, and did it piecemeal. He first got Shenzhen to work. That worked so well that he expanded it to the eastern seaboard. He got 3 or 4 more, and then boom, 15 special economic zones, and then that started unlocking the China story that we see today. So I would not want to, the United States, I think is, no, I don't want to run that. And actually that's why I didn't want to do the regulatory role at the FDA. I think you just have to exit, build something different, and then reform from without.